you everybody for joining us this afternoon on our webinar. We have two folks from Carbonite joining us today, Ray Sullivan and Derek Cheek, who are both two of our product and customer experience experts who are going to go through the ins and outs of downtime and why it is such a risk to an organization and what the true costs really are and how you can take all of those things into account for a complete DR plan. Just some quick housekeeping items before we get started are if you have any questions for us or the presenters at any time, you can feel free to use the questions or chat window in your webinar control panel, and we will answer those questions at the end of the presentation. Or if you can't hear us or something goes wrong, certainly let us know. We also have a handout in the handout section, which is a complimentary white paper that really plays nicely with this topic that we're discussing today. So if you'd like to download that complimentary, you can do that in the handout section. And then also we will be spending about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for Q&A. If you have any questions or would like to know more or hear from our experts, we can certainly follow up with you following the webinar. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our speakers today. We have Ray Sullivan from Carbonite and Derek Cheek from Carbonite, and we would like to welcome both of you to the presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this is Ray Sullivan. Thanks. So this is Ray Sullivan. I'm going to get started today. I will start by introducing myself and walking through the causes and costs of downtime and getting into some data that we have around impact and risk. And then I'm going to hand it off to Derek for talking about how to actually develop the DR plan and then talk through some of the Carbonite solutions. So just to give you a quick background on me, I was trained as an electrical engineer, but have been working in product management and product marketing for over 10 years now. I've been with Carbonite specifically for 5 years, and I work on the product marketing team. So I really am striving to be an expert in the market, the competitive space, and really understanding our customers and understanding what they need, and then working with the product folks to develop solutions that actually play to the problems that our customers are having. So in that line of work, I do tend to talk to a lot of customers. We do a lot of surveys. We look into market research, competitive research, and I'm going to share some of what we found today around downtime. So I will kick it right off. So as most of you know, downtime is just something that is really unavoidable for pretty much any business, right? There's the big ticket items like natural disasters, and when people hear disaster recovery, they tend to think, oh, flood or fire. But the fact of the matter is, downtime could be something as simple as a user error. Somebody deleted something they weren't supposed to delete. Or even planned downtime, right? That's still downtime, even if it's planned, to be able to do upgrades or, swap out hardware. Really, it's just kind of table stakes for doing business is that you're going to have downtime at one point or another. We recently did a survey together with Spiceworks. So this was specifically for small and medium businesses. And we asked them about both planned and unplanned downtime. Of the folks that we spoke to, 75% said that they had experienced unplanned downtime in the past year. And really half of them said that the primary reason for downtime was either power or internet outage. And then the next big ticket item after that, nearly a quarter, said it was a hardware issue. The same survey, which was also an interesting point that I'd like to just quickly touch on, is we asked about planned downtime. And we asked, thinking about the past 30 days, how often did you have any incidents of planned downtime? 65% of those that we surveyed reported that they had at least one incident of planned downtime in the past month. So that was, again, planned downtime may be planned, but there's a lot of cost and risk associated with downtime even when it is planned. We also have some data points here from a Zeta survey, and you may have heard some of these before, but 54% of companies reported that they've experienced events lasting more than 8 hours. And every hour down counts. It was kind of staggering to find out that more than half of the downtime are reported more than 8 hours, which is a little workday. This is really have documented disaster recovery plan. But even those that do have disaster recovery plans say that they know that it's inadequate. So it's either outdated or needs to be supplemented. And they're aware that they need to supplement their solution, but they don't really know where to start. So we're talking a lot about downtime. What's the problem with it, right? The problem is that it costs money. So since 2010, the cost associated with downtime has climbed 38%. And we know that the typical hourly downtime costs are between $500 and $10,000. That's a huge range. I know that's kind of almost a silly statistic, but it's very variable depending on the size of the business, the infrastructure they have in place, the nature of the disaster, and so forth. So, depending on how much you depend on your data and kind of your setup, it could be extremely costly. And this gets into a little bit about, if we're talking about a full site outage, how much can businesses estimate that they're going to lose during a site outage? And so we know that over 25% of businesses report that they lose probably more than $100,000 a day for every day on time. And 2/3 of businesses lose at least $20,000 a day per day of downtime. So obviously that's something that is extremely risky and impactful. And the crazy part is that it's actually difficult to calculate, which is kind of why we see huge ranges when we say, well, estimate how much downtime is costing your business. There's not just the issue of lost revenue, which is somewhat straightforward to estimate, although there are a lot of inputs into a revenue calculation that you need to keep track of. But what you can't really measure is damage to reputation or even ability to continue moving. So, it could be months later that, you really feel the impact of downtime. Excuse me, sorry. And then going back to the earlier point that the majority of businesses who have a DR plan in place believe that it's inadequate, we looked at our survey and it showed that when businesses are asked to describe their DR plan, many SMBs went to talk about really a backup solution. So we asked them specifically, what DR solution do you have in place? And it looks like about 90% of SMBs said that they had some sort of DR plan, but when we asked them to describe it, it really seemed like they were conflating backup with disaster recovery. So there's kind of levels of risk associated with data loss and downtime, and then there are different solutions ranging from that to high availability. And so
Well, it sounds like we may have lost Ray here, but the joys of technology that we all get to fight through as we do our business here. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Derek Cheek. I'm the manager of the professional services team for DoubleTake. I've been with DoubleTake for nearly 15 years and am considered the subject matter expert for most things disaster recovery, high availability, and migration-wise through our organization. So this is a conversation that I have quite frequently, talking about the cost of downtime, and we're going to start getting into a little bit more of the technical kind of components here of where we're at. So the slide that Ray left me off here is really, as I like to point out, is not all disasters are created equal, and she really touched upon this a minute ago, and really I want to go through and lay out the levels of triage, as we call them, for business continuity planning. So there's several different layers or levels of triage of your disaster that can lay out really what your recovery strategy may need to be, or what really that problem is. And we tier them through 5 tiers or 5 levels of triage, whereas 1 becomes very minimal, and 5 is a major impact. So, it starts from, minimal impact. As Ray mentioned earlier, somebody deletes a file they weren't supposed to. There's a very small, interruption or kind of loss of data, all the way through, corruption, application data. You have a medium impact on business when you get to the level 3. 3 is what most businesses start to plan for, right? Is where you start having application accessibility lost, multiple business units or multiple people. We're talking usually multiple servers, databases, front and back ends. I can't do an application. I can't perform a part of the business that I'm trying to, all the way into a major large impact disaster with a level 4, all the way to a level 5. This is where level 5 is where we talk about a large-scale facility loss. This is a data center is no longer available. It's either not accessible to people. It's physically not there anymore. So it becomes a very large component of the levels of triage. So really understanding what you're planning for is the really important part for understanding how you're going to recover from that, because a recovery from a tier 1 or a triage level 1 disaster is different certainly than a level 5. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind as we start going through some of the components. Ray, can you get the next slide, please? So one of the components here is talking about through the different levels of triage is understanding data recovery versus disaster recovery. And I think some of that is really kind of how we've turned our thoughts into disaster recovery over the years through, what means what, how am I going to do these different processes, and is what I have for disaster recovery good enough? So understanding that a data recovery solution really is a basic form of disaster recovery. This is copying files to disk, to tape. It's the traditional kind of backup scenario. Why? Because I'm backing up my data at a point in time, and I have ability to recover that data at a point in time. This is really helpful, really good for tier 1 disasters, tier 2 disasters, maybe even some components of tier 3 disasters, as this allows you access to data components, and you can recover these little pieces that you need, right? Bob in accounting deletes a file, you can recover an Excel spreadsheet pretty easily. A database becomes corrupt, we can recover SQL databases, those kind of things. It's really done through tape or another series of computing systems or through the cloud. The second part is how we look at true disaster recovery. And when you start getting into business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning, you have to start looking on a little bit larger scale than just how is my data, how am I protecting my data? It's how am I going to recover functionality, right? So it's more than I can restore my files if something goes down, but for disaster recovery, I have to make it very clear that this is how I'm going to get my users to access those systems again, okay? So you have to be able to take and look at this complete image of servers, all of your application stacks, plus your data, okay, and allowing some type of failover or access to a disaster recovery facility to bring things online so users can get the business going again. And that's really one of the big differences between data recovery and disaster recovery. True disaster recovery planning takes into account as how are the people from accounting going to be able to get into the accounting software? Or whatever the application is, how is the business going to start running again when it's happened versus how do I recover that piece of data? And it really comes into the simple components of discussing RPO and RTO. So your RPO is recovery point objective, right? That really is how old is your data, okay? And some people look at it and tape back up. If I have a disaster, I back up my tapes nightly. I have a disaster the next day. My data is roughly 12 to 24 hours old. So that's kind of lost data, right? I'm accepting the fact that 12 to 24 hours ago is the last copy of data, right? All the way up to different levels of disaster recovery planning and of course, more frequent backups or snapshot capabilities. There's a lot of different tools that can lower that RPO, right? How much lost data do you want to have? And also you need to take into account your RTO, so your recovery time objective. This is really how long is it going to take your business to recover? So what's your downtime? What's it going to take to get your users back in and performing business type operations again? So when looking at disaster recovery versus data recovery, you really start getting into that RPO versus RTO and really having to plan, what's that mean to me and what's that cost to the business, right? What's that cost to the downtime and recovery? Next slide. So when you're taking a look at data protection or disaster recovery solution planning, you're really looking for three parts or three components that come into this, right? So part one is pretty straightforward. You're looking for a heterogeneous solution that goes across all systems. It doesn't make sense to recover your database servers different than your application servers, different than your accounting software, different than your production software, different than your email. And it doesn't make any sense because it really convolutes things and really makes things difficult. So when you're trying to do disaster recovery, data protection planning, you really want to try to come as close to as few systems as possible. This is definitely one where the KISS method comes in about keeping it simple. Okay, we tend to overly complex things in IT because it's very easy to do that. But with disaster recovery planning, we really try to keep things down to the simplest, the lowest common denominator. So the simpler we can keep this, the better. The more closer to a single or fewer solutions for recovery strategies, the better. I know in some small businesses it may not be a big deal, but if I'm trying to recover my entire, say, flight operation systems and booking systems for a major airline, I may be talking 800, 900, or 1,000 plus servers. And that's going to be across, Unix systems, Linux systems, Windows systems, VMs, physical boxes, you name it, right? And having to have multiple types of recovery for a major disaster from that really just takes that RTO and pushes it out and makes it more complex in the event of a true disaster. So definitely is a number one component here. Number two, again, we want to keep it simple, try to keep things as heterogeneous as possible, but we want to keep it straightforward. So while I've done a lot of planning with a lot of companies, I've had DBAs say, it's okay, I can write scripts to do things like that. That doesn't keep things straightforward, right? That actually makes things very complex because if that DBA is not available, it's not a way to test and is considered a reliable solution, right? It kind of puts the property into one person's hands versus keeping that business structure straight. So being able to easily configure, test, and have that maintain and improve that RPO and RTO is very important. And it doesn't matter if you're talking data protection, data recovery, or disaster recovery, you still have to be able to reproduce your RPO and RTO statistics to say that I've tested this and I'm comfortable with this and the business can see this as a repeatable model. The last component here is really thinking about what's going to happen while I'm running this and what happens if I have a disaster. So not only from the technology that you're utilizing, but how do I bring in people that can help me, right? When I'm under pressure and everything's going wrong and the business has gone down and there's been a major disaster and buildings are gone and I don't have access to systems and people are hurt, all these things cause a lot of chaos and problems when doing disaster planning. Being able to have support from vendors, whether they just be outside consulting companies or vendors for your disaster recovery solution, make sure that takes a big part of your decision when you're coming in and trying to declare and prepare for these disasters. Do they have the staff that can help you press the buttons that need to happen? Can they augment your team to make these things go. So that has to be a critical component, because when things go wrong, you need staff to be able to do that. Next. So really, when you start getting into a DR plan, right, when you identifying data protection strategies is definitely one thing. Creating a business continuity disaster recovery plan really kind of steps into another level of boundary. So really, when you're developing a DR plan, you need to identify your mission critical business processes, okay? And the reason why we say that you need to identify mission critical is because different systems are going to have different RPOs and RTOs. So you need to start classifying as what's most important, what's middle of the road important, and what's only important once a month or every 2 weeks, right? So, for instance, most businesses consider their email systems as a mission critical item. If the sales teams and the executives can't email, they can't perform the business. You can't receive POs, all the different things that you can't do, that's considered mission critical, okay? But being able to run an end-of-month report that shows time utilization and time tracking on your employees so that you can make sure that your employees' utilization is appropriate, that really kind of falls into that, well, this may not be as important as some other components. So you want to make sure you start identifying and laying out, what's really, really important, what can the business survive without, or not survive without. Then start going, well, what if this went away for a day or two, will be okay? And then what if we didn't have this for a week or two, would be okay? So start to identify these processes, application systems, and organize them by mission critical, not mission critical, but important, and then it's needed, but it's not needed right away. Once you have that really lays out your RTO, your RPO, right? And you have to be able to say, okay, for my mission critical processes, I can't have any lost data, and it needs to be available within minutes. Well, you've now established your RTO and RPO. So you've said it has to be up-to-time data, so my RPO can't be a day, right? It needs to be near real time, and my recovery time objective needs to be, say, less than an hour. We can't have more than an hour outage. And you've right there established your SLAs for that business and laid down, this is what I have to have for recovery. Now take it into another component and say, maybe some HR auditing software, right? It doesn't change very often, so our RPO, our recovery point objective does not have to be real time because it only changes once a month or every few weeks. And our recovery time objective, well, it's only when we're hiring new personnel. In a disaster, we're not necessarily hiring new people, so I can have this down for a few days and do that. So being able to organize things by mission critical RTO is important, and that really leads you into your ability to say, okay, so now I need to be able to do all of these components. These are the kind of solutions that can provide this level of availability. These are the solutions that can provide what the business says that it needs. Now this is what we can budget and cost for it. Okay, so laying out your plan a little bit more is extremely important to being able to lay out what you'll be able to afford and really how you get that plan to work for you. Next. So everything kind of comes into a project cycle, and DR projects are no exception to that. And there really are two components to a project cycle framework. So you've got to be able to do all of your planning, so your infrastructure analysis and discovery. You've got to understand what your protection and recovery plan is going to be. You've got to really be able to go through your recovery strategy planning, right? But in the middle of this, you're implementing your full disaster components here. So you're testing your validation, your bandwidth analysis, doing your proof of concepts, making sure this really is going to work for the business. Environment prep, getting your DR sites online, getting your installs and your DR in place. Really, that's where that implementation starts to overlap with recovery process documentation, recovery strategy planning. So being able to maintain both of these project cycles are important as you constantly have and create a plan, and you're able to understand that plan. So being able to follow your project cycle is very important, and understanding your plan to be able to constantly do regular DR testing, health checks, compliance audits, plan maintenance, all these things, okay? Because you have to be able to test a plan for it to be valid. If I put a plan in place today for my business and don't test it for 2 years, in 2 years, how do I know that plan's valid? Well, it may work or it may not, but I haven't verified it along the way to make sure nothing broke. and I haven't reevaluated my company's business needs to see is it going to work, right? Businesses tend to change and they tend to evolve, so there's always a need to test and to reevaluate. A lot of companies will do this every 3 months. Many large organizations may do it twice a year, but being able to test and evaluate your DR plan really is a key component. And that plan is going to change as the company changes, okay? So as you go through your planning, it really is okay to be able to make changes to that because it needs to do that. So we've got a quick poll here. So kind of during the process through this, we like to do a quick poll of the audience to one, see who's paying attention, but more importantly, get some data back from you and really allow us to customize and get information to you based on this. So we have a couple quick polls in here, and everybody should be able to select one. So we'll give you here a few seconds here. So are you planning to reevaluate your disaster recovery plans? If you can check this and give us some answers and feedback. We enjoy the live feedback here because again it helps us tailor these in the future, tailor the data we can get to you. Not sure how long the poll runs here, but give it probably a few more seconds here to go ahead and have everybody click. So kind of the quick poll here, just give an idea of what your peers are. So it looks like there's about a little over 150 of you online right now. So out of this, you can clearly see that quite a few of you are currently reviewing your DR plan. Right, and that's tremendous because honestly, this should be a constant review. Your DR plan should always be being reviewed. There should never be a stop in that. It should always be evaluating, are we looking to go to a cloud environment? Well, how's it going to change our DR plan? Am I looking to virtualize? How's it changing our DR plan? I'm upgrading my applications. How does it change my DR plan, right? You should constantly be reviewing it. But more important, the nice part here is I can see a significant amount are looking in the next month, the next 3 months, the next 6 months to start reevaluating that plan, to really go through and lay down what might be fundamental changes to do testing evaluations, to do all the things that honestly you really should be doing in a DR plan. So kind of taking the end step here, so we've discussed kind of how you need to lay out a DR plan, really how to lay your RPOs and RTOs, and some of this here is now to kind of talk about how the Carbonite technologies can help you do that. So looking into our eVault component, so we have our eVault backup systems that allows you to manage that data recovery, to be able to provide some of those RPOs and RTOs, especially for your lower tier components. But more importantly, being able to be cost effective, right? Being able to retain data, being able to recover that data kind of on demand as it goes through it, certainly is a very important part. Next slide. And really kind of it's a basic slide on how does it work. So as you can see, we can take you directly to our eVault cloud, or we can move you through a local appliance then cloud, remote offices, then a cloud. So really what we try to do with our eVault deployment here is be able to take your data and put it into multiple locations to give you multiple recovery options. And that becomes very important when talking about data recovery and some levels of disaster recovery, is being able to have multiple ways to recover that data, multiple point in times to recover that data, okay? Very important to see you can go from remote locations, combine that data, consolidate it. You can go one-to-one as a straightforward. You can do the hub and spoke, centralize that information, centralize, disperse it, and then certainly come back to our cloud on that. Next. Then taking things a step further, being able to do true disaster recovery, high availability, and that's when we get into DoubleTake technologies. So we start taking things a step further than saying we're going to be doing, recovering our data and have a backup of our data. DoubleTake allows you to take and say, I have a real-time copy of my entire system, right? So we start talking about how do you do that system, that application recovery, how do you redirect your end users to that new solution. This is really nice because it allows you to take any platform that you're currently on, whether you're physical, virtual, or cloud-based, and be able to create a secondary entire site, whether it be physical, virtual, or cloud as well. It's real-time replication, so your RPO is near real-time. Your failover components happen in minutes, so it takes in and reduces that recovery time objective to minimal. We take that same concept and move it into the ability to be able to do migrations. Okay, so really talking about moving your workloads and protecting that user activity and putting it somewhere else in a near real-time fashion with minimal downtime. Okay. Next. So again, kind of how does it work here? To visualize, you have your primary system replicating in real time over to the target system or your DR system. The nice part is we can help you build out that new environment automatically. It's very WAN friendly by using compression, encryption. You can select the entire server or just data components and really centralize the management of those components, whether it be 2 systems or 2,000 systems. Additionally, when it comes time to do that disaster recovery component to invoke that, it has the ability to go ahead and bring that target online as the production server and automatically redirect users to that machine. So your users don't know what happened. They just see that there was some type of interruption in service. Now they're running in the new location, typically minutes later, once you decide to cut over or do a failover, and they're online and running and working just fine. And then next slide. So really, it's a complete data protection and disaster recovery set from Carbonite, right? We're able to deal with hours, days, downtime tolerance to minutes to hours of downtime tolerance, being able to really cover any type of disaster recovery for whatever size business that you're in, and being able to be very flexible with those kind of components. So we're trying to meet that #1 component of creating a disaster recovery plan or creating a data protection plan that has one solution across all systems, one solution that covers multiple platforms. We're really, as an organization, as a company, the technology, we're definitely trying to cover that. And then finally, last slide. So really, we have a huge foundation of success. When you start talking about what we have as an organization, we're talking a huge customer base, over 26,000 customers. They can't be wrong. They're very, very happy with us with a 95+% customer satisfaction rating. And that's from the sales process. That's from the support process. That's from the professional services side of things. So a lot of different components coming in for a very high customer satisfaction rating. 150 petabytes of data under eVault management in our eVault cloud. So a lot of customer data, thousands of partners, hundreds of thousands of migrations, data protection scenarios, all of those things. So really what it comes into is we have the skills, the background, and the experience to say, no matter what your scenario is, there's definitely a way that we can help. So that really kind of wraps up what we have for slides in the presentation. I do welcome people to start adding some items in the chat window if you have any questions or things that you would like to discuss. We have plenty of time to review that if anyone has one out there. We welcome, again, to put in the chat. Either Ray or myself will start answering questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Derek. We actually had one question which I'll address really quickly just because I'm sure it's on a lot of folks' mind is, yes, absolutely, these slides that you saw today will be available to you following the presentation. We're going to send a follow-up email that's got the webinar recording as well as a copy of the slides, and that should also have the handout that's also available in the handout section for you. So we'll supply all attendees with that information following the webinar. And then it looks like we had a good question here that either Ray or Derek, either one of you can field this. This one might be a good one for Derek. Somebody asked about IP addresses. So the major struggle with this is the IP address. Not everything has been done using DNS or alias. So how is that being resolved with the Carbonite solution? Derek, maybe you can touch upon that a little bit.
Yeah, so obviously when creating an infrastructure and creating your systems, the best way is to always put in things and use a DNS alias. That that allows whatever users to not have to memorize numbers, because logically our brain works better with names than it does with numbers. However, all of our products do understand that not everything can be looked up by name, so all of our products do allow connections via IP address. As a matter of fact, in most of our product workflows, once that system is brought into our console and our workflow console, and the job is created, it actually creates an IP to IP based connection. So we are going to know that IP address. We're going to resolve it if you put into a name. If you put it into an IP address, we'll try to reverse look it up or pull it from that system. But by all means, if you don't have DNS in your infrastructure, it's okay. And certainly, on another component of that, when you're talking failover and recovery, the products actually do allow for that recovery of either going to a new infrastructure with a new IP set and automatically updating your environment with that, or tolerating being able to recover by that IP.
Great. Thank you, Derek. There's another question that came in that I think is also a really good one. Someone was curious if we can address how risk drives your DR strategy and possible solution, which I know is sort of the overarching theme of this thing, but maybe, Derek, you can touch a little bit upon, risk and how that's driving DR strategy and the solution behind it.
Well, sure, yeah. Risk is something that every IT decision has to take into account. Risk is one of those things that it becomes speculative, and a lot of times it's based upon experience, it's based upon market trends, it's based upon what we learn in users groups, or various forms of research on things. So certainly, that's the whole point of disaster recovery is risk mitigation. You're trying to minimize that impact that having an outage can have on your company. A perfect example of that is years ago, prior to me coming to DoubleTake, so we're talking 15 plus years ago, I worked as a consultant for a company, and my large client was actually a Fortune 1000 manufacturing company, of which I was responsible for all of their business continuity planning and all of their disaster recovery components. Their business had 76 manufacturing plants across the United States, and the business decided that if they went down for some reason, after 4 hours, they could run manually for 4 hours, but after 4 hours of being technology offline, they had to declare disaster. And at that point, it was $125,000 an hour that they lost in business revenue because they couldn't produce anymore. Okay, so there were so many components that were set up from a recovery planning strategy to help not get into that 4 hour window. And some of it was kind of exciting to be a part of, right? Because you get to do some neat stuff. But the whole concept of DR planning on this was to eliminate that risk of money loss and eliminate that risk of that downtime. And so there were processes built in place for redundancy of the hardware systems, so the plant wouldn't go down. If they went down, within 5 minutes, the corporate office had notifications of IT outages. From then, there was actually, after 15 minutes, there was a task force, a SWAT force that was brought in place to say, hey, this is what's going on. When we hit that 4 hour mark, if we couldn't fix it remotely, the company actually had 2 private jets, and one would be automatically assigned to the disaster recovery team to fly to that location immediately. So at all times, I actually had to keep a change of clothes in a bag in my vehicle, because I could be told, your plane leaves in 45 minutes and here's where you're going. To get on site to start doing technology recoveries and really put hands on what was going. So risk mitigation is an absolute important part of technology. Understanding that example is a bit of an extreme one, but every day we go through things in our technology that manage risks. You run Windows updates so you don't risk getting some type of malware or problems that are seeking vulnerabilities in Windows. Your backups and your disaster recovery plan should be an extension of that kind of mentality. You're trying to make sure that the business can't go down, and if it does, you can bring them back online in a timely manner without anybody really knowing what goes on. Okay? I learned a long time ago in IT and technology that a good IT person, they do their job effectively, and nobody ever knows it happens. And that's really the concept behind true disaster recovery planning.
Great points there, Derek. Lots of good questions coming in. We have another one here that I think is something good to touch upon. A lot of organizations seem to create disaster recovery plans for each application, but it sounds like we're talking about sort of one overarching disaster recovery plan. Is there a best practice recommendation? Is it really necessary to do DR plans at the application level, or is it sort of better to have one overarching plan that sort of buckets or classifies those applications into different classification groups like mission critical, business important, et cetera?
Well, there's a couple different ways you can look at it, and there's definitely a few different mind shares on how to look at that. So part of it becomes, what tier of disaster are you planning for? So there definitely has to be some type of application level planning on that. So you know, when you're planning on, well, what happens if I lose just one SQL database even though I have 100? You have to kind of plan for that kind of stuff. When you're doing disaster recovery components, you know, when you start looking at a tier 3 and higher, you start eliminating the concept of, well, this is application, you know, this is SAP, or this is Oracle, or this is SQL, or this is Great Plains, or this is whatever, and you start just lumping it into, this is an entire system because I'm recovering the entire server. So you start becoming a little bit application agnostic the further into those tiers that you go for the level of disaster. So when I'm planning on a level 4 or a level 5 tier disaster, it doesn't really matter what application the server's on. I have to recover the entire server. I have to recover its entire application stack. So really, depending on the granularity you're wanting to get on that recovery strategy, many times it's not as important to really get in the details of that application, because if you're just saying, okay, I've got 10 servers, and if any time the application stops on any one of them, I'm going to fail that server over to my DR, then the application really becomes irrelevant. I'm just going to move everything that server did over to another site, press a button, and it comes online, and it works again, and everybody's still happy playing together. So it kind of goes into your recovery strategy. Now, you definitely want to look at that component and go, well, what if just a small component of that fails? Do I have the ability to recover the data and get it back versus, you know, having to invoke a full DR? So it really kind of goes into some of the planning, the size of your infrastructure, and really how simple do you want to make it?
Great. How does our solution interface with SD-WANs, Derek?
Well, a software-defined WAN really is just taking the traditional look of, you know, MPLS and routers and defining that over a more manageable component, right? So a software-defined WAN takes and gives you that control, much like, you know, traditionally most network people are used to controlling their LAN through their core, or your SAN through your core switches and your worldwide names. So, you know, how does it work over an SD-WAN? Really, we're just routing data from point to point. So when you're taking a backup of a system, you're saying connect to this agent and pull the data across here, or push this data based upon whatever the recovery strategy you're going on. So really, the interaction with the SD-WAN is we're just looking at it to do the fundamental routing components from one location to the other. There's not really anything specific or that has to be done or plugged into, because it's still emulating that old school network that we're all used to visualizing, but it's making it much more functional and usable from an administration standpoint.
Great. A few more questions here before we wrap up. Lots of good stuff coming in, so I want to make sure that we get to everything if possible. Another good one was considering software as a service where SLA requirements are 99.9%. What needs to be considered as a more critical asset? Is it the data center co-location? That was a question that came in from the audience that seemed like a really good one.
Well, I mean, it's a very broad question is what it really is. So, you know, when you're looking at software as a service, you're looking at, you know, 4 nines of availability. You know, you have to define what that truly means. So, for instance, cloud components have sold everyone on high availability, 3 or 4 nines of availability of servers, but not applications. So that's really what you're getting your availability on is you can log into the server, but SQL may not run on it because SQL's on you. Or if you're actually doing a software hosted service, there's really a lot of components that are in the background of maintaining that availability. And when you're putting your investment into a hosted software as a service or infrastructure as a service, you have to kind of see what parts am I responsible for versus what parts are the vendor responsible for. And that's really going to drive what your recovery strategy is. So if you were using, Azure SQL, software as a service, Microsoft is, responsible for all of your uptime. So they have to give you that SLA of 99.99% or whatever their guarantee is. If you're just using Azure in general, it's still your servers, your data. You have to go in and look at your disaster recovery plan still as an extension into that.
Great. This was a comment from an audience member, which I think is worth talking about or getting your point of view on, Derek, is they say DR plan should be done based on business function, not application. Business process is better. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think if they interlink, right? So business process, business units are going to drive their applications, right? So, to say it's by business function, yes, but that's what drives what application is that. So if I say, okay, I need to make sure all messaging works fine. Well, now I'm talking about Exchange potentially, right? So I now need to look at my Exchange. So you're just translating what that business function is to that. You don't necessarily want to do it by business unit, right? Because some business units may have things more important than others in them. So while your accounting team, they may have an application that handles all, incoming accounts. Well, in a disaster, you still want to be able to accept money, but the accounts payable component you may not be able to want to. However, you've got to be able to pay people. So those may be three specific different applications that work, right? So you have to kind of classify which one might be important to running the business day to day. And I have to tell you, paying your employees is kind of important. At least the employees will think so. So, you've got to be real careful. You don't necessarily want to identify just applications, and I know that the slide says did identify applications, and that really is a good differentiator. Definitely, you want to identify applications, but understand that they are part of a business function, right? You have to decide what that function is and not just say, hey, I've got this application on my PC and I use it every day. No, well, what does it do? Okay. You kind of have to translate those together.
Great. And do we have any added features for hospitals or a hospital system that's dealing with HIPAA or PHI compliance?
Yeah, so that's one that comes up. Compliance is a tricky thing, right? Because it's 6 million lines of regulation written by people that aren't necessarily the ones responsible for deploying and maintaining that, and compliance can be very difficult. Certainly, there's a lot of things that we do in our product to go across the board, right? So there are things in the products that do help maintain HIPAA compliancy or HIPAA audits. There are things in there in the products that help clients or help customers maintain PCI compliance. There are things that are put in for U.S. Department of Defense standards. So across the board, there's little pieces in the product and then part of our process itself that does allow companies to maintain those type of classifications.
Great. And then the last question here before we wrap things up is, how would you compare and contrast DoubleTake versus Veeam's solution? Which is probably a question we get a lot, right, Derek?
Yeah, and that's kind of saying, how would you compare your car versus my car, right? And the answer is it depends. I like my car because it runs nice, but yours might be newer, right, or shiny, or have a faster engine, or whatever it is. It's tough, and product comparisons can be difficult because it really comes down to the use case. Okay, so the use case, your recovery strategy, your RPO. I will say Veeam puts themselves as more of a backup solution, whereas the DoubleTake solution is certainly a failover disaster recovery solution. we would put it on par with the eVault systems for backup and recovery, although it's different recovery strategies. You know, I could say other things into it, but I don't want to get too deep into too much of a product comparison. But you know, there are strengths on both sides, and it really depends on what your use case was for. As I would say, one may be a better fit than others, or what your RPO, RTO strategy. Now, I will say that I have worked with many clients that we use a combination of technologies, and that really goes into understand your strategy, understand your needs, and then find tools that may fit into different needs a little bit differently. So,
and if I could chime in here too, just the idea that we have extremely broad support with eVault and DoubleTake. So Veeam really is designed for virtual machines, whereas our solutions span physical, virtual, legacy, new. So we're able to take a mixed environment and cover all of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray. Another good comment from the audience that I think is worth talking about is, you know, we've seen businesses forget to include their infrastructure servers as part of the DR plan, such as a domain controller. Without these, your DR plan will fail if hosted at a site with no data center, or no domain controller. What do you guys feel about that? Do you want to weigh in on that comment?
I think that's an absolute 100% correct comment, right? Infrastructure services is probably one of your more important applications. It doesn't matter if you're using what your ERP solution is. It doesn't matter what your database applications are. If you can't authenticate, you don't work. So absolutely, infrastructure services, DNS, AD, you know, whatever you're using for DNS components, you know, info blocks or through a Linux or Unix-based environment, that absolutely does fall into your mission-critical business service or application. So yes, those have to be taken into account, and you're absolutely right. You know, a lot of organizations don't think about that because that's one of those things they take for granted. I can log into my system every day because there's so much redundancy built into the infrastructure. But you do have to plan on it. I always recommend a domain controller in the DR site as a minimum. That way, if you do have a level, you know, a tier 5 disaster, that way your domain is still functional and can still route to whomever can log onto the network. So yes.
Great. I'm just reviewing the last questions here. Somebody asked about DR strategy, GDPR, and data protection, and whether you need a certification for that. How do you feel about that? Do you think certification is important when it comes to DR strategy and data protection, or what are your thoughts there as kind of the final question?
It's going to be unique to your company, your organization, I would say your market vertical and your goals, okay? You know, having certifications on industry standards are good, right? They're especially good if you're going to maintain consultant type roles in that and being able to do those things. So again, it's a tricky question because there's not a lot of, I need a little more basis to talk, but in general, you know, if you're going to talk to be an expert on something, you probably should be certified. So yes.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Derek and Ray, both of you, for your time today, this afternoon. If anybody has any follow-up questions that we didn't get to, certainly feel free to, you know, reach out to Derek directly at dcheek@carbonite.com or Ray Sullivan, rsullivan@carbonite.com. Either one, you know, we will be happy to answer your questions offline. Just to repeat, yes, we will be sending these slides and a recording of the presentation out to all of you folks who stuck around for the Q&A and for everything. Thank you so much for your insightful questions, and hopefully we answered all of your questions today. And just want to say thank you one more time from the folks at Carbonite, and you know, be on the lookout for those follow-up materials, and for our next webinar coming up on June 29th, which is all going to be about taking the pain out of regularly testing your disaster recovery plans and technologies. So I think that's going to be a good one you're not going to want to miss as well. And once again, thank you all for attending today, and we hope you all have a great day. Thanks very much, Derek, and thanks very much, Ray.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone.